You're listening to episode 171, Dr. Kate Lund, Growing Up with Hydrocephalus. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here. Hello, my friends. I'm so happy you're here today. My name is Katie Taylor. I am a certified child life specialist and the host of this podcast and the CEO of Child Life on Call. We do our best to put resources and child life services and programs into the hands of parents as fast and as often as possible, because we know that child life information and tips makes your world so much easier when parents feel empowered to navigate the healthcare system. So that's what we're doing. I cannot find or think of a better conversation to give you this week. She is a licensed clinical psychologist with 15 years of experience, is a peak performance coach, a best-selling author, and TEDx speaker. That's quite a resume to be on our podcast today, and I couldn't be more excited to share with you. In addition from pulling on her own experience as a mom of two, she's also a kid that grew up in the hospital with hydrocephalus. And so she offers so much information and nuggets of her own wisdom, her own experience, her own perspective, and now what she knows through her training. She's worked at Shriners Hospital for Children, Boston Mass General Hospital, Beth Israel, all of which are affiliated with Harvard Medical School. So, Dr. Lund, we're so grateful and so lucky to have you with us on the podcast today. And I just can't wait to share our conversation with all of our parents and healthcare professionals that listen. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Dr. Lund. It's interesting. I was actually just in the hospital with my daughter, and Child Life came by, and I gave them a big smile. Oh, it's so great to see you! And of course, my daughter was like, "I hate hospitals. Why are we here, everybody?"
Right. Yep.
So I'm just so happy to be involved with this podcast. Is what I'm trying to say, and to get to meet you. My daughter, my second daughter, I have three. She has a genetic anomaly that is super rare, and it leads to all kinds of things like developmental delays, deficits, epilepsy, autism, all the things. And it's been a real journey trying to sort of find our tribe. And, I have found this podcast to be extremely helpful for other people's stories, to feel less alone, and also for resources, because my child has such a rare disease. It's really hard finding anybody else with the same diagnosis. And I will say that the Down syndrome community has been incredibly open and welcoming to us, which I super appreciate.
Wonderful, wonderful. Wow, that's intense. That sounds very. How old is your daughter?
She's 7 now,
Mhm.
and we found out about her diagnosis when she was about 9 months old.
Okay, gotcha. Gotcha. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's really an intense journey that you've been on and that you're on. I'm glad
Mhm.
that this community exists and
Yes.
this podcast seems amazing. So awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm. Yeah, and Dr. Lenza, why don't you introduce our listeners to a little bit about who you are, where you live, your family, and what you do, and why you come and share so much of your story, and then your own wisdom and skill set.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I've been one for about 20 years. Have worked kind of across the domains of the lifespan, but have focused a lot in the child and family domain, particularly with folks facing the serious medical diagnosis of a child, physical injury, that sort of thing. I did my fellowship at a burn center in Boston, pediatric burn center, which was a really powerful and wonderful experience. And I feel like I would still be there if we hadn't moved like 6 times with my husband's job. So really, really loved my time there. Beyond that, I do bring a unique perspective to the table as a psychologist working in this domain. I grew up with a medical condition called hydrocephalus, which was diagnosed when I was 4. And the good thing about hydrocephalus is that it can be managed with something called a shunt. But the problem is shunts break. So spent a good portion of my childhood in and out of the hospital, some significant sort of complications and long, prolonged hospital stays and recovery periods embedded in there for years and years and years. So a lot of times sort of coming back to school, looking different, feeling different, having to play catch up, kind of redefining myself in terms of, fitting in with peers, academics falling behind, that sort of thing. So that was a formative time and definitely a catalyst for the work that I do now and my passion for understanding the human experience, particularly in this way, in this area with kids and families struggling with medical challenges. So that's a little bit about me. And then you asked about my family as well. I'm married. I've been married for 25 years. I have twin boys. They're 15 at this point. Um, they keep us on our toes, very, very busy. Feel like I'm always driving these days. And we also have 2 dogs, Wally and Squirt. And
Oh,
Wally is a 1-year-old doodle. And we just completed our certification as a therapy dog team.
oh.
And he and I are going out to assisted living facilities to visit. When he turns 2, he'll be eligible to go into children's hospitals. And that's something that we are absolutely planning on doing because I really want to bring that kind of joy back into the lives of children and families who are struggling.
Hmm. Yeah. Have you guys met a facility dog yet, Mihja, when you've gone into the hospital?
We have not,
Yeah.
no, and I would love that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope, I'm sure you'll get connected with Seattle Children's, but I know a few friends there. So if you do kind of get, it's a long process to get a dog into the hospital. So
It is, yes.
it's not easy. There's so
It's
much that goes into it.
right. Well, that's a wonderful offer. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I have one person I've been talking to who just got her dog in, so
Good. Good.
he definitely needs to be 2, and he's not quite 2 yet. And
Yeah.
and we need a little bit more practice in some of our other venues. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's our goal, and it's so rewarding and makes us feel good. And I think he really enjoys it too. I just see it. He shifts into work mode when we enter a facility.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Dr. Lund, can I ask you a question about growing up and going in and out of the schools you were talking about? Did they have things like IEPs or 504s? Like, what were the supports for you and your family to help you to be successful? Because obviously you've been successful. So, what were the supports like? How were they able to access that?
Right. So to be honest, I really never had any special supports in that way from the school. I was in a private school, so they didn't really offer IEPs or 504s per se. but I did have a lot of support, and one of the things that was really, really helpful for me, I really believe, thought about this a lot, is that in the points where my hydrocephalus was managed, my shunt was working well, my parents really worked to look at me as the child that I was, as opposed to the condition I happened to have. And I think that that really helped others to do the same. Teachers, parents of friends, my parents were very supportive. I feel like that was really an important sort of foundational thing for me, because it allowed me to move forward. It allowed me to see that there was possibility on the other side of each of the challenges that I was facing. And I'm not meaning to make it sound easy, because it certainly wasn't. It was hard, and there were a lot of hard moments, but in the big picture, I had a ton of support, and I was very, very fortunate.
That's
And
such a good
oh,
question.
the other thing about the schoolwork, and I somehow got the memo early that hard work was going to be necessary to sort of achieve the same results as my peers. But that really stood me in good stead down the road, because hard work became my default. So I
Mm.
worked harder than perhaps the average kid out there, and I still have to be honest with you. And it's good, because it's put me ahead of the game a little bit, and it particularly in high school and college, where things got more challenging. I already had that foundation in place, because I kind of experienced with a lot of my friends who didn't really have to work early on. Things kind of fell off, the wheels fell off the bus as they had to move into college and beyond, or high school and beyond. And for me, I was already working at that level,
Mm.
and so that was very helpful.
What a wonderful example for your kids, to see that work ethic.
Right. And yeah, and the with boys, one of them is just wired to work, right? So he's been focused from the get-go. And the other one, it's taken a little bit for him to sort of come into focus with it. But I do think that he's observed the example, and it's amazing how much growth he's demonstrated in this past year as a freshman.
Wow.
And again, some learning challenges for him. And so not entirely easy all the time, but really important for us to have him take ownership from the inside out and work as hard as he can within his own unique context. And that, I think, is important for all kids, and was really, really important for me to understand my context as a kid, understand my context now. What are the things that are challenging? What are the things that I couldn't do necessarily? But wait, let's focus on the things as a kid that I could do and build within that context and from that perspective. And I think that was another thing that really, really helped me.
Absolutely. I'm curious, Mihja, if you're thinking about this too, but Dr. Lund, what do you remember from your hospital and procedural experiences as a child? I think we tend to have we have a lot of parents on this podcast, of course, and we remember every little piece, from how long it took the nurse to get the IV attempt, to the long wait in the waiting room. Those aren't things you really remember when you grow up and you look back. So what sticks out to you from your own childhood?
Right. Yeah, that's such a good question. And before I get into the details of that, because there are quite a few, I
Mm.
just want to point out this whole idea. Mihja, you had mentioned that when the child life person came into the room, your daughter was like, "No, I'm out." And so I had an experience like that. And it's a really funny story how it evolved, but it was when I was 18. And so I don't usually talk about this piece of the experience because it just feels cumbersome, but in this context, it feels like it makes sense. My hydrocephalus was diagnosed when I was 4. And that was in the mid 70s, when imaging technology wasn't as it is today. So it took them a while to figure out kind of what was going on and that sort of thing. Some of the diagnostic procedures were very, very intense, very, very painful. Wasn't as easy as going into an MRI machine and, seeing that your ventricles were enlarged. Um, so that was when I was 4. And then all the way through the point when I was 18, it was the spring of my senior year in high school. and I had not been feeling well all year. I was okay, but I just hadn't really been feeling well. I was having kind of low grade headaches. I wasn't myself. And finally, during the spring semester, I was captain of tennis team. I was supposed to be playing well. Because tennis was the thing that had kind of developed as my sport and a really important piece of my identity, because I couldn't do so many other sports, contact sports. I'd be really careful with my head. So anyway, it wasn't going well the spring of my senior year in high school. And my neurologist, no, it was my neurosurgeon, my neurosurgery team was like, well, this great new technology just came out, the MRI with gadolinium. Let's give you a scan and see how it's going. And so that's when the 2 tumors showed up. And so that was the original cause of the hydrocephalus, were these 2 tumors. It was a tectal glioma, and then it was a tumor in my cerebellum. And then, they were like, oh no, you have 2 tumors. And, the tectal gliomas are generally low grade, but they're treated differently depending these days. But they did biopsy both of them, and they were low grade. There was a big controversy about the pathology on them. It was a big ordeal. It was not good. I was basically in bed, unable to see after the second surgery for almost a year. Postponed college for a year. It was a really, really difficult time. And during that time, one long hospital stay, I was coming out of surgery, or I was going into some test, or I don't know, something. And this child life specialist showed up next to the stretcher and started talking to us. And my mom was there, and she was talking to my mom. She's lovely, lovely person. And probably in her early 20s at that point. I was 18. I was like, I didn't want anything to do with a children's hospital. I was upset and in pain, and it just wasn't good. And I didn't want anything to do with this child life specialist. But she persisted. And I think I was actually in the hospital for a long time at that point. She persisted. She kept coming by. And what happened was she became a really good friend of the family and of mine. And so once I did recover, and, I started college, and I really kept in touch with her, and we developed a very, we're still in contact today. So fascinating experience there. But it was one of those moments where I too was like, no way, I'm out. Like, I want nothing to do with this. I want nothing to do with you. I need to bail. That was a very long-winded answer for that piece, but the procedures were complex. There were moments that I do remember, and I probably don't remember nearly as much as my mom does, although my parents, I think, have suppressed a lot of it, because it was a lot. It was a lot of heartache and pain. But I do remember when I was 4, they were doing some sort of encephalogram or something, and these huge shotters they were trying to get into my legs, and that was terrifying. And there were many moments like that. I remember my mom leaving the hospital room to go down to the cafeteria, and it felt like she was gone for 6 days, but she was really probably gone for an hour, so that kind of thing, being like feeling abandoned and isolated in the hospital room. It's just things like that I remember. So I'm sure that's kind of in there somewhere. It's very it's intense to think about it. But yeah, those are some of the moments. So probably don't remember it as my parents do. But that's basically the big idea.
Thank you for sharing that.
And can I just say, I want to thank you so much for sharing this part of your story, because for those of us parents who are in the weeds and can't see past the weeds,
Right.
you're such an inspiration, because you have risen above it, and now you're on the other side, and you've built this beautiful life for yourself, this independent life where you help other people. And I think it's hard for us who are in the weeds sometimes to see, is there going to be anything on the other side? So just thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure, absolutely. Anytime. And that's one thing that I always try to, help the parents that I'm working with kind of to see, the possibility for their children on the other side of the challenges, within that child's own unique perspective. And it's like all kids, we're all coming from different perspectives. So our possibilities aren't necessarily going to look the same, but there is possibility, you know what I mean? And I always try to help folks to harness that sense of possibility, while acknowledging the challenges and managing through the challenges. But I think holding on to that sense of possibility is very important.
I thank you for that story too about the child life specialist. It's a really interesting role we play because when I walk in a room and I'm met with some, walls are up, I'm not interested in somebody else. I love being able to tell parents like I'm a choice person. I don't have to be here. You
Right.
get to make the decision about who's in this room. I can absolutely leave. Here's what I offer when you are ready. If you're never ready, that's fine too. There's an empowerment I get when people say no to me and I'm like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Like they don't get a lot of choice and control when they're here.
Right.
I'm a piece that can be, and then I can support them actually, by talking to the nurse on the side or asking someone else to bring something in. But I love kind of being that choice person that they can say no to. So I love that she persisted, because that is
Mhm.
another thing with adolescence, right? Whenever I say I'm a child life specialist, I say, but I know you're not a child. That is just
Right.
what the job title they gave me and
Right.
acknowledging that.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And it's a hard balance to strike, right?
Can you tell us a little bit about your work with families, particularly where there are siblings involved? And I'm a little bit selfish here because my daughter has an older and a younger sister, and
Mm-hmm.
her relationship with the older sister is so much better than with the
Mm,
younger one. I mean, she's only 2,
right.
but there is this sense of like, I don't know why you brought this person in the house.
Mm,
I'm not sure why she's in our lap because it's my lap.
right.
And, and it's hard trying to make the younger sister understand why she can do some things, I'm sorry, that her older sister can't do.
Mhm.
And trying to create these bonds of love between them so that when we're gone as parents, that they take care of each other, the 3 of them. So it's not just on the older one, but also the younger one too. Could you sort of talk about that? Sorry.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And again, so no really easy kind of one size fits all answers. But it's again about the context and sort of that developmental continuum, right? And so just trying to model for your younger child kind of, you know, how to best interact with your middle child, the one who has the challenges, and kind of the same moving up. How old is your oldest child?
My oldest is 11.
Gotcha. And so developmentally, she's getting to the point where you can start to have more kind of overt conversations about what's going on and the challenges and that sort of thing, and kind of brainstorming together about how best to connect. But with a 2-year-old, it's more about sort of modeling and, kind of explaining in very rudimentary terms, sort of your older sister, has some challenges, or, using a different word than challenge, but isn't able to do the same things that you're able to do. And that's okay. We're all different. And kind of trying to create create an atmosphere where there's this sort of foundational or fundamental acceptance, um you know and it's a process that has to unfold over time. There's no
Okay.
button we can push to be like, okay, this is how it's going to be. And but I feel confident that with the modeling that I'm certain you're doing, that they're gonna understand and they're gonna love and care for each other over time. But definitely, a process that will need to unfold over time, and I try to give parents and families that sense that this is a process. There's no one size fits all. Think about it on a developmental continuum. the modeling is really important. And then, as the kids get older and more developmentally sort of, along the continuum advanced, to be a little bit transparent about some of the challenges. And so that transparency piece can evolve as well, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. Thank you so much. And, the older one is like, well, Violet doesn't have any chores. If she could do chores, trust and believe, she'd be doing chores.
Right.
Right.
And that's the piece. And this is an opportunity to really foster that sense of appreciation and acceptance of individual difference for
Right.
your older daughter in relation to your middle daughter. And then, you're kind of doing the same through modeling for your younger daughter. But that's a really key piece here. And that's something that's a core of my work when I go out and I speak and I do all these kind of seminars and such, because really helping our kids to understand and appreciate individual difference, and to kind of help other kids who aren't the same or who have challenges, flourish as a result of those differences is really key, I think, because too often we see the other side of that coin, and that I'm certain won't happen in your house, but out there in the world with bullying and all that stuff, that's a hot button issue for me. I really get upset when I see kids being torn down because of their challenges.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I would just compliment kind of what Dr. Lund said is, these 2-year-olds is a hard age of egocentricity. And how does the world, it's all about me at this point. Like these
Right.
other people exist here, but that's my lap and I've been sitting on it for 2 years. And why are you sitting on it? And vice versa, right? Depending on where Violet falls in that developmental continuum that Dr. Lund was talking about, they could be very close. And when you see them going through the stage together, it could look like a big clash, I would imagine. So, it's so hard validating that, like having two competing big personalities in one spot fight for something. I love giving jobs for that kind of stuff. So making the 2-year-old be like, well, this is your job and you're really, really good at it. And this is going to be Violet's job, or which job do you want to have? And then we'll give the other one to Violet, or vice versa. Can be helpful in those
Great.
little moments.
Those are great suggestions. Absolutely. 100%.
Mihja, I see you're emotional, and it's hard, right? It's like having all this come up. Oh, the stakes feel so high for us when we're in this, I just parenting in general, and we're all kind of different stages of this parenting journey. And it all feels so big when I'm in it. And even upstairs at bedtime, and I'm thinking like, oh, he said this today, and how is this going to impact him for the future? And really
Yeah.
it's just a statement, Dr. Lund, what do you hear a lot as you do your travel and your speaking? And what, some of the themes that you just spoke on is this individual. How as parents can we really harness that in our kids? I'm probably speaking selfishly here too. Like my son is so interested in dance, not good at it. Okay. Like not good, but he just does it and loves it. But then when he's outside with his friends, he's playing football, so it's instilling. I want to foster that. And, how do you convey families to do that?
Yeah, it's such a good question, right? And I think sort of, really letting kids get out there and experiment and experience where they have their passions, like the dance, or then he's outside playing football with his friends. And it's, a normal part of kind of the process. And, at one point, maybe he'll kind of gravitate in one direction or another. So I always kind of tell parents to be very open to sort of connecting with the experience of their child and how they're feeling in a certain activity or in a certain way, and being able to sort of gently step in and guide depending on the age, or have more of a overt conversation if they're a little bit older, that sort of thing. Kind of wondering with them about their experience in terms of, well, what do you think it would be like if you kept dancing and didn't play some of these other sports? when you know in your mind that perhaps dance isn't necessarily, the aptitude isn't necessarily all there, that kind of thing. Because ultimately we want these, and is, has to be developmentally appropriate, but we want the decision for what to kind of focus on and do longer term to come from the inside out with the child. And so it's that process of building to that point, through connecting with your child's experience, trying to understand kind of where their aptitudes are, helping them to experience and experiment in areas that might be a little bit out of their comfort zone. Because who knows,
Yeah.
maybe a new passion will develop, that kind of a thing. So these are
It's
some
so
of the
true.
ideas that I often talk about with parents.
And it's like I watch him dance, and he is just joyful and happy. And then he's outside with his friends and they're barking at each other and you did this or that. I was like, I much prefer like the not great dancer
Yeah.
vibe to
Uh-huh.
that one. So like, how do we get more of that in our life?
Right. It's such a great question, right? And yeah, and who knows, and maybe he'll gravitate to one side or the other. I mean, I know that for one of my boys, when he was 8, it was all about sort of where's the football and I'm happy, but that didn't mesh with him as an 8-year-old boy. You know what I mean? He was much more sort of socially, emotionally evolved at that point than the typical 8-year-old boy. So that made it really hard for him at that point in time. So it took a while for his true passions to evolve and emerge. And at this point, it's rowing crew. And so that's awesome. And it's been so, so good for him. Who knows? Maybe that'll evolve again. Not sure, but we're at the point now at 15 where we can really kind of talk through and sort of brainstorm and try to understand kind of together the experience, but that has to evolve. Can't really do that at 6 or 8 necessarily. You sort of can, but not really.
Mm.
And when you're thinking about your kids in sports, like I tell my kids, everyone's got to have a language, a sport, and a instrument.
Mhm.
And so, at the beginning I choose them, right? But as
Sure.
you get older, you can make your own choices.
Sure.
But when you think about sports, do you have thoughts on how to determine if your kid would be better in a single sport versus a team sport, like I don't like an individual tennis player, I'm thinking, versus being on swim team, or I don't really know sports, a sports ball team?
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, I think it really has to do with the individual child and sort of where their aptitudes and their interests and perhaps passions are guiding them. And it's okay to try different things. I mean, I know that, for me, I gravitated towards tennis pretty quickly and found that that was really a great fit for me. And then dabbled in, field hockey and soccer a little bit in school. Um, but didn't really like it and could kind of see that in myself. And I wasn't actually very good either. It was kind of a thing. But I think it evolves. And I think you can't really identify it too early because, it might evolve all the way through high school, and that's okay. One of my boys has, so far freshman year, he went in kind of feeling like, I don't really know sports wise, where his brother's really into crew. And he tried running in the fall, not a great fit. Tried wrestling in the winter, not a great fit. Turned into one giant bruise. Wrestling was pretty intense. And then started conditioning with a club crew team. And, I was a little worried because I didn't want him competing with his brother per se. They're twins, and that was kind of going to be a little bit hard, but he loves it and it's a click. And who knows if that will be like a long-term click, but for now it's amazing. And just watching him flourish in that is so rewarding and powerful because it's hard when we see our kids flounder. And he was floundering a little bit this fall. And it was a bit hard. So again, long-winded answer. I think it's a evolution and really has to do with where your kids' aptitudes are, because you don't want them on the football field if, that's not, because there's too much risk of getting hurt. And, They're not going to have the joy and the excitement like your son is with the dance,
Mhm.
right? So I think that's a big piece of it. Is there happiness? Is there joy? Is there an aptitude? And then keeping in mind, it's okay to try out a lot of different things, a variety of things.
And are you finding that parents who have kids who have special stuff going on, are they having trouble getting their kids like accepted into like mainstream sports? Are there opportunities and openings for kids who have, special diagnoses but can still, play a sport to be on those teams, like those rec teams or little league teams?
Yeah, I find, from what I've experienced and from what I see in this area, there is that opportunity for sure. You might need to, as a parent, develop a little bit more of a closer line of communication with the coach. And you want the coach to understand, what the challenges are, not in an overt way, so they're pointing them out all the time or anything like that, but just so that the coach knows and you have that comfort that the coach knows. But absolutely, I think those opportunities exist.
Um, I feel like I could keep talking to you and ask you so many questions. But as we kind of come to a close, I want you to share all of your resources that you've created and your expertise with parents. But one of the things I'm so interested in is your ability to speak about your experience. And when did you find yourself really getting comfortable with talking about what you had gone through as a child? Was it always something like you were like, well, I got to go to the hospital this week, or I had to have my shunt placed, or as you grew into adulthood, did you start finding that voice?
It was definitely as I grew into adulthood. All I wanted to do and be when I was growing up was a typical kid. So I did not talk about these experiences when I was a kid. I mentioned briefly that kind of really difficult year when I had to take that time off before I went to college. And I got to college. The college I went to was really kind. They deferred me for a year. And, I just started the next year with the next freshman class. And I got there and I was still in a relatively precarious space. I had to fly back to New York every 6 months for an MRI. It was a thing. I didn't talk about it. I didn't want anyone to know. I just wanted to be seen as a typical college freshman. And I think people picked up on the fact that maybe I was a little bit more careful with my kind of overall well-being, than others. And they kind of were like, what's up with her? But, I was able to connect with folks, have friends. I joined a sorority, played tennis. It was okay. But, I was also in bed at 9 o'clock. I was not out at the parties and, I could just do that. And, I think, that was a piece that I really developed early on, was this idea of really caring for how I needed to care for myself within my own context. But I definitely was not talking about it. It's been much more recent than that I've kind of found my voice and integrated this angle on my work.
It makes me kind of think of your siblings or your other daughters, Mihja, too, is, how they'll find their voice talking about their experience as siblings, and maybe not a lot right now because you want to be seen as normal, typical. And then as you grow up, you really realize how special and the perspective that you've learned and what a different family can give you such a vast and beautiful experience. So it's interesting to
Right,
see how we all find our own voice.
right.
Definitely a process.
Mihja, do you have any more questions for Dr. Lund that your roommate? I'm sure you do, but
Well,
for now.
just one quick one. For parents getting that diagnosis, right? Like you just got the phone call, you just had the appointment with the doctor. Do you have any suggestions for them on how to uh, assimilate that information without totally falling apart?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great question. And, again, not a one size fits all, but to give yourself time to assimilate, to think about, don't be afraid to ask for help, to get clarification, seek resources, that sort of thing. But really, it's about time and sitting with that new reality to let that assimilate and then taking those steps forward from there.
And if they wanted to try to find like a therapist or someone who could be helpful, like yourself, how would you suggest that they search for that in their area?
Right. So either through the local children's hospital,
Okay.
or, there's always the opportunity to sort of Google, medical psychologist, health psychologist, or psychologist specializing in X. But I would start with the children's hospital or the pediatrician's office, perhaps for a specific referral.
Okay, that would be helpful.
Great suggestions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Lund, how can people follow along with what you're doing, see your resources, and learn more from you?
Sure, absolutely. So I have a website which sort of outlines most of my resources, and you can learn a little bit about me there. It's www.katelundspeaks.com. And there's also a link on that page to my parenting course, where I really go through a lot of what we've just talked about. And it's based on my book, Bounce, Help Your Child Build Resilience and Thrive in School, Sports, and Life. And the Bounce book applies to kids across the spectrum of challenge, but really focuses in on the medical challenges. I incorporate a lot of my own experience with the hydrocephalus and the tumors, in the book in terms of, the 7 pillars of the resilient child. So that's probably the best way for my website.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your experience. I know that I feel like I'm walking away with a lot of good information. And Mihja, thank you for giving your time again to us today and your questions and your wisdom. I love having you here.
Yeah, thank you both so much. And it was so nice to meet both of you.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Dr. Lund, as well.
Thank you all so much for listening to Child Life on Call. If you head to our website, childlifeoncall.com, you're going to find all sorts of stuff there for parents, professionals, healthcare providers, child life specialists, no matter who you are. Actually, when you just go to our homepage, it'll help you direct to exactly where you need to go. On that, you'll find opportunities and PDUs for child life specialists. Parents, we've got a starter kit for you. And clinicians, we even have a clinician course, which teaches you how to be a confident and capable caregiver in pediatrics. We're so grateful that you're here. Please DM us on Instagram. And like I mentioned, when you rate and review this podcast, it helps other families be able to find us. So let's keep doing that. And I will see you again here next week.